Hello, everyone. We often talk about success like it's a formula, like if you just work hard enough, you'll get there. But the truth is, success, real sustainable success, is never about what you do, it's about who you are. Why is it that some people, just a few, seem to rise above the noise? They don't follow the crowd, they don't bend under pressure, they don't seek approval, and yet they lead, they inspire, and they build a life that others want to follow. Today, I want to talk about the rare qualities, the mindset and behavior that only about 1% of women actually have, not because they were born with it, but because they chose it. Every single day, they lead with purpose. That's the foundation. When you meet one of the 1%, you can feel it, not because they're trying to impress you, but because they're anchored in something deeper than ambition. They wake up chasing alignment. And that makes all the difference. Purpose is not about having a grand mission statement written on a wall. It's not even about trying to change the entire world. It's about knowing what matters to you and live in a way that reflects that. These women have taken the time to ask themselves hard questions. What do I stand for? What do I want to contribute? What do I want to be remembered for? And because they've done that inner work, they're not easily swayed by trends, opinions, or temporary emotions. In a world that constantly pressures women to fit into a mold, to be likable, agreeable, polished, perfect, the ones who lead with purpose are different. They don't bend to every expectation. They don't dilute their voice just to be accepted. That's because their self-worth doesn't come from the outside. It's built on something internal, an identity rooted in clarity and conviction. These women understand that purpose isn't about being busy, it's about being intentional. There's a difference between motion and meaning. Anyone can stay occupied, say yes to everything, and call it productivity. But the 1% ask a more powerful question: is what I'm doing today aligned with the life I'm trying to build? And if the answer is no, they're not afraid to change course, even if it's uncomfortable. The quiet power in that. When you live with purpose, you become harder to manipulate. You stop making decisions out of fear, fear of missing out, fear of disappointing others, fear of being misunderstood. You begin making decisions based on what feels right, not what looks right. That kind of confidence doesn't come from ego, it comes from intention. One of the most powerful things about purpose-driven women is that they don't just do things, they mean them. When they show up, they're present. When they lead, they listen. When they commit, they follow through. People trust them, not because they're perfect, but because their consistency is a direct result of clarity. When you're clear on your purpose, setbacks don't shake you the same way. You may still fall, but you don't spiral. You regroup. You remember why you started. That why becomes a compass. It doesn't erase difficulty, but it gives you direction through it. That's what separates the few from the many. It's easy to get caught up in comparison, to look around and feel like you're behind, like you should be more, do more, have more. But purpose says stay your course. It reminds you that real success isn't loud, it's not always visible, it's found in the quiet, consistent choices you make when no one's watching. Leading with purpose is not a destination, it's a daily decision. It's waking up each day and choosing to live with intention, even when no one claps for you. That's what makes these women rare. That's what makes them powerful. Because in a world full of noise, the most magnetic person in the room is often the one who knows exactly why she's there. Conviction is one of the rarest and most powerful traits you'll ever witness. It's not loud, it's not showy, it's not about being stubborn or inflexible. Conviction is quiet strength. It's the ability to stay rooted in what you believe, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs you something. That's what makes the 1% so different. They don't just talk about their values, they live them. You can see it in how they show up. When pressure rises, when stakes are high, when the crowd shifts one way, they don't flinch. They don't chase comfort. They don't compromise what they stand for just to keep the peace. That doesn't mean they're aggressive or confrontational. It means they're anchored. They've made a decision about who they are and what matters to them, and they don't abandon that identity for short-term gain. Conviction shows up in small moments too, the kind no one claps for. Saying no when it's easier to say yes, speaking truth when silence would be more convenient, holding a boundary when others expect you to be endlessly available. These aren't flashy moves, but they're the kind of choices that build a life of integrity. And integrity, once earned, is unshakable. The 1% don't need the room to agree with them to feel valid. They don't adjust their beliefs based on what's trending. They don't seek permission to lead. That inner compass they've developed, it doesn't just guide their decisions, it shields them from self-doubt. Not that they're immune to fear or insecurity, but they've learned to trust themselves through it. That's the key. Conviction isn't about being fearless. It's about taking aligned action despite fear. We live in a world that often rewards conformity. It's easier to go with the flow. It's more comfortable to say what people want to hear. But the women who lead with conviction, they choose the harder path. They make the brave decision, not the easy one, and they do it again and again. That kind of courage compounds. Over time, it shapes character. It builds influence. It earns respect. And here's what's really powerful. Conviction doesn't just serve them, it serves everyone around them. Because when you see someone stand firmly in who they are, you feel permission to do the same. That's why they're leaders, not just by title, but by example. They light the way for others, not by demanding it, but by living it. Conviction also gives them resilience, because when you know what you stand for, you're less shaken by rejection. You're not easily rattled by failure. You see challenges not as threats, but as tests, chances to prove to yourself that your principles aren't just words, they're lived truth. That mindset creates grit. It fuels persistence. It's why these women don't quit easily. They may pivot, they may pause, but they don't abandon the path they believe in. And maybe the most important part, conviction brings peace. There's something deeply fulfilling about knowing you didn't betray yourself to be liked, to be accepted, or to fit in. When you go to bed at night knowing you were honest, aligned, and courageous, that's a kind of success that can't be measured in applause or accolades. It's internal, and it's priceless. The truth is, conviction isn't glamorous. It's often lonely, but it's also where greatness begins, because you can't build anything meaningful without it. The world doesn't need more people who follow the script. It needs more women who are willing to write their own, who are willing to stand in the fire and still say, "This is who I am." That's what separates the few from the many. That's what makes the 1% unforgettable. Radical ownership is one of the most empowering choices a person can make, and yet it's also one of the rarest. Most people spend their lives reacting, blaming others, pointing fingers, waiting for someone to fix things for them. But the 1%, they take full responsibility for their lives, not just the wins, but the mistakes, the missed opportunities, the tough lessons. They own it all. Women who practice radical ownership don't wait to be rescued. They don't look at life through the lens of, why is this happening to me? Instead, they ask, what is this trying to teach me? What role did I play? What can I do better next time? That shift in perspective is what allows them to grow exponentially. They don't just survive challenges, they evolve through them. When something goes wrong, the average response is to defend, deflect, or deny, but the 1% lean in. They look at the situation honestly and ask themselves the tough questions. That self-inquiry is not always comfortable, but it's necessary, because growth doesn't happen in blame, it happens in responsibility. And let's be clear, this kind of ownership requires humility. It means admitting when you've messed up. It means acknowledging that you're not always right, and that sometimes you've been the one holding yourself back. But here's the upside. Once you take ownership, you gain power, because if it's your responsibility, that means you have the ability to change it. You'll notice something else about women who live this way. They rarely complain, not because their lives are perfect, but because they've learned that complaining doesn't solve anything. They don't waste energy pointing out problems unless they're willing to be part of the solution. That's the mark of a leader. Anyone can highlight what's wrong. Few are willing to ask, what can I do about it? And ownership doesn't just apply to the big decisions, it shows up in the small moments too. Being on time, following through on commitments, apologizing when necessary, setting boundaries, and actually honoring them. These aren't glamorous behaviors, but they're the foundation of trust, and trust, once earned, is what builds lasting influence. This mindset also creates a sense of peace, because when you live from a place of ownership, you stop trying to control everyone else. You realize the only person you can truly manage is yourself. That insight alone frees you from a lifetime of frustration. You stop wasting time trying to change people who don't want to grow, and instead you double down on becoming the kind of person who inspires growth just by being who you are. Women who embody radical ownership stand out. They're not reactive, they're proactive. They don't get caught up in gossip, drama, or finger pointing. Their focus is on becoming the best version of themselves and contributing meaningfully to the spaces they occupy. And because of that, people naturally respect them. Not out of fear, but because ownership breeds maturity, and maturity earns trust. In a culture that often promotes blame, entitlement, and external validation, taking full ownership is a rebellious act. It's also the path to freedom, because the moment you decide that your life is yours and yours alone to lead, you become unstoppable. That's what sets the 1% apart. Not talent, not luck, but the unshakable belief that no matter what comes their way, they are responsible for writing their own story, and they write it with courage, honesty, and relentless accountability. Vision is the trait that separates those who react to life from those who shape it. It's the ability to see beyond the present moment, to look past temporary circumstances, and to build something that lasts. The women who fall into the rare 1% category don't just live day to day, they live with the future in mind. They have a clear sense of where they're going, even if the path isn't fully visible yet. And that clarity influences everything they do. Having vision doesn't mean having every detail figured out. It's not about having a perfect 5-year plan or knowing every step in advance. It's about holding a deep, unshakable picture of who you want to become and what kind of life you want to create. That image becomes your internal compass, and it changes the way you move through the world. Most people live in reaction mode. They're constantly responding to what's urgent, not what's important. They're putting out fires, chasing distractions, and making decisions based on how they feel in the moment. But the 1% operate differently. They pause, they zoom out, they ask themselves, does this align with the future I want to build? If the answer is no, they're willing to delay gratification, to say no, to walk away. That level of discipline comes from vision. Vision-driven women don't chase every opportunity. They choose selectively. They know that not everything that looks good is good for them. They've developed the wisdom to discern between what's tempting and what's right. And because they're not desperate for instant results, they build with intention, slowly, strategically, with heart and direction. This long-term thinking also gives them resilience. When things don't go their way, they don't spiral or give up. They adjust, they learn, they stay focused on the bigger picture. That's the power of vision. It gives pain a purpose. It turns setbacks into stepping stones. When you know where you're headed, every obstacle becomes part of the process, not the end of the road. You'll also notice that visionaries lead differently. They're not focused on just achieving for themselves. They're building something that impacts others. Their goals are bigger than just personal success. They're legacy-driven. They're thinking about how their work, their voice, and their presence can leave something behind that matters. That's why they're magnetic, because people can feel that they're being led somewhere meaningful. Vision gives you confidence, not arrogance, but grounded confidence. When you're walking in alignment with your bigger picture, you don't panic when someone else is doing better. You don't feel threatened by detours or delays. You trust the process because you trust your purpose. And that inner certainty, it's rare, it's powerful, and it can't be faked. Women with vision also surround themselves differently. They're intentional about who gets access to their energy. They seek out people who challenge them to grow, who reflect their values, who see the same horizon. They're not afraid to walk alone for a season if it means walking in the right direction. They'd rather take a longer route with integrity than a shortcut that costs them their identity. And perhaps most importantly, their vision isn't rigid. It evolves. They're not attached to the exact path, but they stay committed to the outcome. They allow space for the vision to expand as they grow, but they never lose sight of why they started. That blend of flexibility and focus is what keeps them moving forward, even when things feel uncertain. The truth is, without vision, it's easy to drift, to settle, to wake up one day and realize you've been living on autopilot. But with vision, every step becomes intentional. Every decision becomes meaningful. And over time, those small aligned choices create a life that feels not just successful, but deeply fulfilling. That's what the 1% understand. They're just not just chasing goals, they're creating a future that reflects their values, their purpose, and their highest potential. And that's a future worth working for. Trust is one of the most valuable currencies in life. And unlike attention, it can't be bought. It has to be earned. That's what sets the top 1% apart. They don't chase recognition or validation. They don't need to be the loudest in the room. Instead, they focus on being dependable, consistent, and authentic. People trust them not because of what they say, but because of what they consistently do. In a world obsessed with image, it's easy to confuse visibility with influence, but they're not the same. Anyone can be seen. It takes something deeper to be respected. The women who truly lead, who inspire, who impact, aren't the ones always demanding the spotlight. They're the ones who build a reputation for integrity behind the scenes. They follow through on their word. They make decisions that reflect character. And because of that, people listen when they speak. These women understand that leadership isn't about control, it's about credibility. They don't need to dominate conversations or constantly prove their worth. There's a calm strength in how they carry themselves. You can feel that they're solid, grounded, real. And in a world full of noise and posturing, that kind of presence is magnetic. One of the reasons they're so trusted is because they're consistent. You know what to expect from them. They don't show up one way in private and another way in public. Their behavior aligns with their values even when no one's watching. That alignment is rare. It sends a message without words. You can count on me. They also listen more than they speak. Not because they lack opinions, but because they're intentional. They don't talk to fill silence. They speak when they have something meaningful to say. And when they do speak, people tend to pay attention, not because they've demanded it, but because they've earned it. These women aren't trying to impress, they're trying to make an impact. And they do it by showing up with humility and clarity. They admit when they don't know something. They're not afraid to say, I was wrong, or let's figure this out together. That kind of transparency builds credibility. It humanizes them and people feel safe around them. Trust is also built through empathy, and the 1% understand that deeply. They don't just lead with strategy, they lead with heart. They take time to understand others, to listen with the intent to truly hear. They don't make assumptions. They create space for others to show up fully. That emotional intelligence builds connection, and connection breeds trust. Another key piece, boundaries. The women who earn the deepest trust are not the ones who say yes to everything. They protect their energy. They're clear on what they can give and what they can't, and because they respect their own boundaries, others are more likely to respect them too. People know where they stand, and that clarity builds mutual respect. They also stay calm under pressure. When things get tough, they don't panic or lash out. They don't deflect blame or act impulsively. They respond with thoughtfulness and grace. And people naturally gravitate toward those who can remain composed in chaos. Over time, trust becomes their foundation. It's the quiet force behind their influence, their relationships, and their leadership. While others may be chasing likes, followers, or approval, these women are focused on what truly lasts: character, consistency, and connection. And that's the difference. The 1% don't demand trust. They don't manipulate it. They earn it through everyday actions, quiet integrity, and a commitment to being real in a world that often rewards performance. Because when you trust someone, really trust them, their voice carries weight, their presence matters, and their leadership doesn't just impress, it transforms. Growth over comfort. It sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest choices a person can make, especially consistently. Most people are wired to avoid discomfort. We seek out what feels good, what feels safe, what feels familiar. But the women in the top 1%, they make a different decision over and over again. They choose to stretch instead of settle. They don't just talk about growth, they live it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Choosing growth means constantly stepping into the unknown. It means taking on challenges that make you question yourself, pushing through resistance, and walking into rooms where you don't have all the answers. It's uncomfortable, it's messy, and it's absolutely essential. because nothing great is ever built in the comfort zone. These women understand that. That's why they're different. They say yes to opportunities that scare them. They initiate difficult conversations. They take feedback without getting defensive. They try things they might fail at, not because they want to fail, but because they know failure is part of learning. Growth-minded women aren't addicted to being right. They're committed to becoming better. That mindset alone, the truth is, growth doesn't feel good in the moment. It often feels like friction, like doubt, like fear. That's why most people avoid it. But the 1% know that comfort is a liar. It promises peace, but delivers stagnation. It keeps you stuck in routines that feel safe, but slowly kill your potential. These women refuse to live like that. They've tasted the discomfort of transformation, and they've decided it's worth it. You'll notice something else about them. They don't wait for the right time. They don't wait until they feel completely ready or until every condition is perfect. They move, they start, they adjust as they go. They understand that readiness is a myth. Confidence doesn't come before the action. It's built through action. And that means they're constantly evolving, constantly leveling up, constantly becoming more of who they were meant to be. This kind of growth is intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. These women surround themselves with people who challenge them. They seek out mentors. They read, they reflect, they invest in their development. They make space for learning even when life is busy, because they know growth doesn't just happen when it's convenient. It happens when it's prioritized. They're also self-aware. Growth requires honesty with yourself. It means being willing to admit when your habits are holding you back, when your mindset is limiting you, when your excuses are louder than your goals. These women don't sugarcoat things. They tell themselves the truth, and then they do something about it. And maybe the most powerful thing about choosing growth over comfort is that it changes your relationship with fear. Fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its power. Because when you've walked through enough discomfort, you stop seeing fear as a stop sign. You see it as a signal. This is where the breakthrough lives. That shift changes everything. Over time, this commitment compounds. The woman who once hesitated to speak up now leads with confidence. The woman who once doubted herself now mentors others. The woman who once avoided risk now embraces it. Not because she became fearless, but because she became brave enough to grow. And that's what makes the 1% extraordinary. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's not even timing. It's the daily decision to lean into discomfort instead of running from it. It's the courage to evolve when it would be easier to stay the same. In the end, growth isn't just about reaching goals. It's about becoming the kind of woman who's capable of so much more than she once believed. And that kind of transformation, it only happens outside the comfort zone.